Kendall, Lillian's future daughter-in-law, froze mid-toast, the envelope trembling in her manicured hands. "This is an eviction notice?" she whispered, voice cracking. Across the room, Lillian, Michael's mother, the uninvited matriarch, stood calm, composed, and merciless. "That house you moved into with my son? It was leased. You broke the terms." Gasps rippled through the bridal shower like shattered crystal. By the time anyone moved, the mother-in-law had already turned and walked out, legacy intact. "All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." The pot roast was burning, but no one cared. The argument had already scorched everything else. "I said what I meant," Jenna snapped, her voice cracking through the kitchen like a whip. "You should have died instead of my mom." Silence detonated in the room, not a stunned, dramatic pause, an oxygen-sucking vacuum. I stood there, dish towel in one hand, spatula in the other, like some caricature of domestic defeat. Across the granite island, Kyle didn't flinch. His mouth stayed shut. His eyes shifted to the floor like he was waiting for this to pass, like a thunderstorm he'd decided not to feel. I blinked once. That was all I allowed. Not because I wasn't shattered, but because I had too much practice holding pain under the skin. "I'm going to my room," I said. My voice was steady. I don't know how. I walked past them slowly, deliberately, like I was wading through smoke. I didn't slam the door behind me. That would have been too generous. Slammed doors scream. I wanted mine to whisper, "I heard everything, and I won't forget it." In the quiet of my bedroom, the walls closed in around old memories. My late husband's favorite chair still sat near the window, where the afternoon light made his absence sharper than usual. Gerald would have never allowed this to go on as long as it had. He'd warned me years ago, before the cancer, before the funeral that tore us all down. "Jenna's not grieving. She's greedy. Don't confuse the two." I didn't want to believe him then. I wanted to believe that time and shared grief might turn us into something resembling a family. Instead, they moved in 6 years ago with their infant and promises of "just until we get back on our feet." And like ivy through brick, their presence slowly took over. First the living room, then the kitchen, then Kyle's suggestion to convert my sunroom into a shared space. Jenna began redecorating without asking. Throw pillows that weren't mine, a diffuser that smelled like artificial vanilla choking the hallway. But I let it go. Because that's what mothers do, until today. Because that sentence, "you should have died instead of my mom," wasn't just anger. It was truth that leaked out when the filters fell away. And Kyle's silence? That was his signature on it. I sat down at the edge of my bed, elbows on knees, fingers laced. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply stared at the beige carpet until my breath slowed. Then I stood up. I opened the top drawer of my dresser and reached past the lavender sachets and the tucked-away birthday cards. My hand found the old keyring, brass, cold, solid in my palm, the spare set, the master copies, still labeled with those little red tags Gerald had printed at the hardware store himself. And beneath it, I pulled out the manila folder, the one labeled in my own careful handwriting, Deed, 109 Woodshire Lane. It was heavier than I remembered. Not in weight, but in consequence. The house was mine. Bought in 1993. Paid off in full by 2009. I'd refinanced once when Gerald got sick, then worked overtime shifts at the hospital to catch up. I'd raised my children here, watched 2 dogs grow old here, buried one of them under the maple tree in the backyard. And somehow, along the way, I'd let them forget that. A noise stirred in the hallway, Jenna's footsteps pacing the creak of the floorboard outside my door. Then a low mumble, maybe Kyle. I didn't lean in to hear it. Instead, I sat back down and opened the folder, the original deed, the mortgage closure letter, the county tax receipts, my name, stamped over and over in blue ink like a whisper from the past saying, "You still own something, even if it's just your right to peace." I didn't know where this was going, but I knew it was going somewhere, and it wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I woke early, earlier than usual, The house was still dark, the hallway dimly lit by the flicker of the porch light sneaking in through the front glass. I didn't flip the switches. I wanted to move through my home, not just to walk it, but to feel it. 30 years. That's how long I'd poured myself into these walls. The hardwood floors still bore faint grooves from my kids' Hot Wheels. The kitchen counter had that faint crack from the time Gerald dropped a cast-iron skillet while teaching Kyle to cook chili. Every room in this house held a version of me no one seemed to see anymore. I padded into the living room. Jenna's cardigan was draped over the back of my recliner, the one Gerald bought me for my 50th. A plate of crumbs sat on the end table. The throw pillows I'd carefully arranged were on the floor, replaced by some velvety gray ones she ordered online. "Neutral tones," she said once. "The mustard yellow is a little outdated." Outdated. I looked around and realized something. I had become the guest, the uninvited tenant in my own home. I watered the plants, paid the bills, and brewed the coffee, but I was an afterthought, a shadow moving politely around someone else's life. 6 years ago, when Kyle called after losing his job, I didn't hesitate. "Just until things even out," he promised. Jenna was 3 months pregnant. She'd cried on the phone, said she didn't want to raise a baby in a cramped apartment with no heat. Gerald had only been gone a year, and the house had felt like a mausoleum back then. So I opened the door. They moved into the master bedroom. Said it made more sense with the baby on the way. I took the smaller guest room, told myself it was temporary. When postpartum hit Jenna hard, I handled the late-night feedings. I cooked, cleaned, paid their insurance premiums when COBRA ran out, but temporary stretched like gum on a hot sidewalk. First a few months, then a year, then birthdays passed and car registrations were renewed, and they were still here, spreading wider, speaking louder, asking less. I crossed into the dining room and opened the antique buffet. The paperwork was tucked where I'd left it. I sat down, turned on the lamp, and began reviewing everything by hand. It was all still in my name. Deed, title, taxes, every last detail. There was no "we" in the ownership, just Elaine Thompson signed in pen across decades of paperwork. I heard Jenna laugh upstairs. Light and sharp, like a wine glass cracking under pressure. Kyle mumbled something. Then a door closed. It felt like they were on the second floor of a hotel I no longer managed. My husband used to have a saying. I could still hear it in his voice, slow and warm like it was lined with bourbon. "Don't let generosity turn into servitude." Back then, I thought he was just being cautious. Now I knew it was a warning. They weren't just guests anymore. They'd become entitled to something I built, something they'd never poured a single drop of sweat into. And the worst part? They had convinced themselves it was already theirs. I held up the deed under the soft glow of the lamp. Thick paper, embossed seal. I ran my fingers over my name like it was Braille, like I needed to remind myself that I still had the right to act, that I hadn't gone invisible yet. The doorbell startled me. I walked slowly to the door, peered through the peephole. Carol's face, my oldest friend, my first call when I couldn't sleep last night. She didn't say a word when I opened the door. She just handed me a bag of bagels and said, "You call the realtor?" I shook my head. She arched an eyebrow. "Well?" I picked up the phone, my hand steady. I dialed the number and waited through 2 rings. When the realtor answered, chipper and unsuspecting, I said only one word. "Tonight." The porch light buzzed with moths when the realtor pulled up, late, flustered, and apologizing before he even made it up the steps. "Elaine?" he asked, straightening his blazer and glancing back at the sleek black car he'd parked too close to the curb. "I don't want signs," I said before he'd even crossed the threshold. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "No signs, no open houses, no balloons or fresh-baked cookie gimmicks, no curious neighbors. I want privacy and I want offers. Quiet ones." He hesitated in the doorway, scanning the foyer, his eyes catching on the crown molding and original hardwood floors. "You've got a good house here. These floors alone could drive up value." I didn't nod, didn't smile. I only stepped aside and let him in. He moved like a hawk through the living room, mentally tallying dollar signs. I stayed close behind, watching as he skimmed his fingers over the fireplace mantel, paused at the stained glass over the staircase, and peeked toward the kitchen, just in time to hear Jenna laugh upstairs. He cleared his throat. "I've got a corporate buyer, big real estate investor out of Chicago. They're scooping up homes like this, preferably furnished, with fast closings." I folded my arms. "Can you make it disappear?" He looked at me fully for the first time. I saw the shift in his posture, the way his clipboard dipped slightly. "I can," he said, "but it'll go fast. No inspections. Cash. If you're serious, they'll wire a deposit tomorrow." I led him to the dining room table and slid the folder across, everything already in order. "I want closing in under 30. Tell them I'm not interested in counter offers." He whistled low. "You sure you don't want a weekend to think it through?" I gave him a thin smile. "The only thing I'm second-guessing is waiting this long." He gave a respectful nod, tucked the paperwork under his arm, and left with a firm handshake and the faint scent of aftershave lingering behind. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I stood in the kitchen for a long minute, letting the silence settle, broken only by the refrigerator's hum and the soft creak of footsteps above. Upstairs, Jenna's voice filtered down through the vent, syrupy and sharp. She was on the phone. "She's just being dramatic. Honestly, this house is a money pit anyway. Can't wait until it's ours so I can rip out those dusty curtains." I sat at the table, pulling out a pen and the thick stationery I hadn't touched since Gerald passed. The paper was heavy, ivory with a faint linen texture, something we used only for things that mattered. "Gerald," I wrote, "you always said to hold the line. I'm sorry it took me this long." The words came slower after that, not sad, just steady, like I was sealing a box inside myself and labeling it, "Done." By the time I capped the pen, my hand ached, but my chest didn't. The hall light clicked off upstairs. A door shut. I leaned back in my chair and let the kitchen light buzz above me. The floor was cool against my bare feet. A glass of water sweated in my hand as I reread the letter, and then came the pounding, hard and impatient, knuckles hitting wood in a way that told me this wasn't just another petty disagreement. "Elaine!" Jenna's voice was jagged and full of spite. "Are you seriously going to hide in your room like a child after the way you acted earlier?" Another slam, then a louder one. "I demand an apology, now!" The walls weren't just paint and plaster. They were fingerprints, memories, ghosts of holidays and birthdays layered in light and wallpaper, and yet just one room over, Jenna called them outdated as hell. I was in the hallway, folding the Afghan Gerald's mother had crocheted when I overheard her voice through the vent. "I swear if I see that velvet couch one more time, I'll set it on fire," Jenna sneered with a theatrical groan. "It's like living in a senior center. That lamp in the den, it literally smells like dust and regret." Kyle mumbled something, too soft to make out, but his silence had grown familiar, like wallpaper you forget is even there. I didn't move, just stood there holding that blanket to my chest, the scent of lavender detergent still clinging to the yarn, the echo of a woman who once loved me like her own. I thought of the dozens of times I'd walked past Jenna rearranging furniture without asking, moving things that had been in their places since Gerald and I first moved in. No discussion, just decisions. There had been the baby shower she hosted here, uninvited, taking over the living room like it was a banquet hall, the endless parade of her friends, her voice spilling down the stairs, laughing as she called the place vintage chic, when I knew what she meant was old. She never saw the mornings Gerald and I spent in this kitchen, barefoot and quietly reading. Never knew about the night he proposed right here, with the scent of burnt spaghetti in the air and rain tapping against the window. She never asked. Once, during dinner, Kyle casually suggested transferring the title just to ease the tax burden. I had laughed then, too hard, too long. I remember saying, "If I die broke, it won't be because of bad taxes. It'll be because I trusted the wrong people." He hadn't mentioned it again. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out the plastic storage bins I kept hidden beneath the winter coats, each one labeled in Gerald's tight square handwriting. I opened the first and began packing what mattered: porcelain figurines from his mother, my wedding china, the yellowed photo albums I'd promised to keep safe. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if each item were glass. In a way they were. In the distance, a ding vibrated against the table. Realtor, offer received, strong cash bid, ready to close, can call in the morning. I stared at the screen, heart thudding harder than I'd expected. No balloons, no signs, no parade of strangers dragging mud into my foyer, just a clean exit offered like a dare. "Are you moving?" The voice startled me. Kyle stood in the doorway, frowning. He wasn't angry, just confused. His eyes fell to the album in my lap, the carefully folded linens on the bed. "You packing for someone?" "No," I said, not looking up. "Just taking inventory." He stepped inside. "You didn't say anything. Is everything okay?" I met his eyes then, really met them. "Everything's fine, for the first time in a long time." There was a pause. Something unreadable crossed his face, then a half smile. "Well, if you're thinking of downsizing, maybe we can help figure something out. To keep the house in the family." I said nothing, just gently closed the album and laid it on top of the box. He hovered a second longer before turning to leave. "Let me know if you need help lifting anything." I waited until his footsteps faded, then opened my phone and tapped out a reply. "Tell the buyers I'll sign as soon as they're ready. Let's move forward." Kyle found me in the den early the next morning, still in my robe, sipping coffee from the chipped mug that once sat on our wedding table. He leaned in the doorway like a stranger trying to act like he belonged. His eyes dropped to the half-packed box of photo albums on the floor. "Are you seriously moving?" he scoffed, half laughing like it was a punchline. I set the mug down and looked him square in the eye. But you are." For a beat, he didn't move. Then he snorted. "Okay, funny. You're just upset. Jenna was out of line." "I'm not upset," I said, calm as rain. "I'm finished." He blinked at me. "Finished with what?" "This arrangement. This house. The way things have been going. I sold it." Kyle let out a sharp, awkward laugh like he thought he misheard. "You sold the house?" "It's done. Offer was accepted last night. I signed the papers over coffee." "Wait, what?" He stepped forward. "You're bluffing. There's no way you could do that without telling us." "Why would I tell people who treat me like furniture they're just waiting to inherit?" His face twisted. "This is insane, Mom." I stood up slowly, the weight of 30 years of ownership in every bone of my body. "No. What's insane is letting people disrespect you in your own home and calling it keeping the peace. I gave you shelter. You gave me silence when your wife told me I should have died instead of her mother. She was angry. She didn't mean it. And you let her mean it," I said, "by saying nothing." I heard the front door slam. Jenna barged in, still in her running tights, holding her phone like it was a badge. "What's this about selling the house?" she barked. "I sold it," I said. 30 days. You're free to find new arrangements." "You can't just kick us out," she shrieked. "We have rights. You're acting unhinged." I almost laughed at that. "That's what's got you so scared, isn't it? That I'm finally acting like I matter." Jenna's voice sharpened like glass. "This is elder rage. That's what this is. You're unstable. Maybe you do need a psych eval." "You can have a lawyer call mine," I said. "But I promise you this. You'll be packing before the Christmas tree goes up." Kyle rubbed his temples. "You'd seriously do this to your own son?" I turned toward him, steady and unshaken. "You already did it to yourself, when you let her weaponize this roof against me, when you stood there while she wished me dead." Jenna stormed upstairs, stomping like a teenager. I could hear drawers slamming. Kyle followed her, muttering curses under his breath. By lunchtime, Jenna had gone full digital warfare. Carol texted me, "Check Facebook. She's ranting." Sure enough, there it was, a long, capital letter-filled post about abusive boomers ruining families, holding power over younger generations, and making their children homeless out of spite. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but anyone with eyes could read between the lines. There was even a blurry photo of the living room, my living room, with the caption, "Imagine being thrown out of the only home your child has ever known. Shameful." I didn't comment. I didn't even react. I closed the app, made myself tea, and opened my late husband's file box. The smell of old paper and cedar oil rose up like a memory. Tucked inside was the note he wrote on our 20th anniversary. Don't let generosity turn into servitude. I'd kept it all these years, and now it felt like prophecy. That evening, while I was going through his watch collection, a ping echoed from my laptop. A private message on Messenger, from a name I didn't recognize. "You don't know half of what your son and daughter-in-law said behind your back." I stared at it. My heart didn't pound, my hands didn't shake. I just exhaled, because I already knew. I never thought betrayal could make a sound, until I opened those screenshots and heard it, the soft, dry click of something inside me breaking. The stranger who messaged me turned out to be Jenna's ex-best friend, apparently just as fed up as I was. No pleasantries, no build-up, just an image dump that loaded like a slideshow of everything I hadn't wanted to believe. There was Jenna typing in a group chat. "She's slipping, I swear. Maybe we'll get lucky and the Alzheimer's comes early." Old people shouldn't be allowed to control assets this big. We're practically hostages in her dusty mausoleum. I scrolled with shaking fingers. Then came Kyle. "She'll outlive us all just to spite me. We need to figure out how to keep her from tanking the equity. At this point, she's a future expense, not a parent." Not a parent. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long while, the glow of the screen lighting my face like some kind of cruel confession booth. There was no defense. No, it was just a joke. These weren't whispers behind a door. They were strategy sessions on how to manage me like an overdue bill. I forwarded everything to my email, heart thudding like a slow drum. Then I called Carol. She didn't gasp. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She just sighed like she'd been waiting for this proof to show up. "You need to protect yourself now," she said. "Legally, all the way down." By 9 a.m. the next morning, we were sitting in my attorney's office, a tidy woman named Camille who wore reading glasses that seemed built for X-ray vision. I handed over the screenshots. "I want to update everything," I said. "Will, trust, power of attorney, all of it." Camille's eyebrows lifted slightly as she read the messages. "You want them out of your estate?" "I want it bulletproof. I don't want either of them contesting a dime. Add a no contest clause and make sure every document is notarized 6 ways to Sunday." Carol gave me a little nod from the chair beside me. Camille got to work. While she drafted updates, I stared out her window at the rustling oaks, the kind that hold their leaves a little longer than they should. Stubborn trees, just like me. By the time I walked out with a fresh binder in hand, I felt 30 pounds lighter. Not from joy. There was no joy in this. Just relief. A slow breath in a room that had been suffocating for too long. That night, I moved through the house like a quiet sentinel. I rechecked every drawer I'd emptied, every heirloom now wrapped and labeled in storage bins stacked by the door. Carol had helped me earlier that week, carrying the things that mattered most, my husband's old watch, my wedding album, the quilt my mother made, into a rented unit across town. Far from curious eyes and prying hands, and then I stood in front of my safe. It wasn't a big one, just a modest lockbox tucked in the back of my closet, but inside were the documents that could outlast a house, a fight, even a son. Title papers, the trust packet Camille had drawn up, letters from my husband, birth certificates, death certificates, and everything that came between. I knelt down to double-check the lock. That's when I noticed it. The carpet had been shifted, just barely. The dust line around the safe was broken, as if someone had moved it and tried to place it back exactly the same way, but not quite. I opened the lid slowly. Everything appeared to be intact. but I counted every envelope, every seal. Something about the air inside felt disturbed, like someone had opened it, just long enough to breathe over everything I'd protected. And when I stepped back out into the hallway, I didn't need to wonder. Kyle stood at the top of the stairs, startled like a child caught mid-theft. Our eyes met, mine steady, his unsure. "Were you looking for something?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Silence. But I already knew the answer. He stood there like a shadow that didn't expect to be seen. Kyle, my son, caught at the top of the stairs just outside my bedroom. His face flickered between guilt and something uglier. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. After a few seconds of stammered silence, he turned and disappeared into the hallway like a coward in retreat. I closed the bedroom door behind me, the latch clicking like punctuation. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made a list, a full inventory, what I owned, what I had moved, what I hadn't. By sunrise, I had called the locksmith. By noon, every lock in the house had been changed. The front door, the back, even the interior doors led to my room and the den. I installed a keypad for myself, then I ordered cameras, discreet, nearly invisible, one in the hallway, one outside my room, and one by the safe tucked behind my dresser. Carol came by later that day, arms full of empty filing boxes. "They think you're old and distracted," she said, helping me lift the safe into the trunk of my car. "Let's show them you're anything but." We drove in silence to the storage unit she helped me rent the week before, climate-controlled, private, and under my maiden name. Inside it, I placed not just the safe, but everything they'd hoped I'd forget: the notarized deed, updated will, trust revisions, medical directives, even the journals my husband had kept before he passed. His handwriting still made my chest ache. On one page, I'd underlined a note he'd written in blue ink. "Don't let love excuse disrespect, especially not from your own blood." The moment we sealed the unit, I felt like I'd locked away more than just documents. I'd secured my sanity, my future, my story. The next morning, I came down to the smell of overcooked bacon and Jenna humming tunelessly in the kitchen. "Good morning, Elaine," she said with a smile that made my skin crawl. Kyle looked up from his coffee and offered a too pleasant, "Sleep okay?" I said nothing, just nodded and walked straight past them, hearing the falseness rattle like coins in a jar. I knew that act, hollow sweetness before the storm. Something was brewing behind their eyes, but I was no longer afraid of the rain. Later that afternoon, the realtor called. "We're ready to schedule the final walkthrough," he said. "The buyers are thrilled. They said it already feels like home." Home. I'd forgotten what that word felt like until now. Without the bitterness, the eggshells, the creeping sense that I'd become a tenant in the very house I once painted with my husband. "Let's do it," I said. I hung up and stood in the living room, taking in every detail. The cracks in the ceiling, the carpet they always mocked, the faint scent of lilac from the plug-in I kept by the staircase. I had loved this house, not for how it looked, but for what it meant. It held the echoes of my children's first steps, my husband's laugh, Christmas mornings filled with warmth, not weaponized silence, and still, I was ready to let it go. That night, I heard it, a voice, low and sharp, seeping through the vent above my bed. "Kyle." "She'll be gone one way or another," he muttered. He was on the phone. I couldn't make out who he was speaking to, maybe Jenna, maybe someone else, but I heard those words clear as a threat. I sat up in bed, gripping the edge of the blanket with both hands. My heart didn't race this time. It slowed, hardened. It didn't feel like fear. It felt like resolve. They thought my memory was fading, but I remembered everything worth hiding, and I wasn't done yet. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m., right on time. I opened it to find the young couple standing with hopeful eyes and matching navy scarves, their gloved hands clasped tightly like they were preparing to enter sacred ground. "Elaine?" the woman asked gently. Her voice reminded me of wind chimes, polite, deliberate, and not a note out of place. "That's me," I said, stepping back to let them in. Welcome home." They walked in slowly, reverently. The man, he introduced himself as Nate, paused at the archway near the living room and ran his fingers along the trim. "This molding, it's original, isn't it?" he asked. I nodded. "Cherry wood. My husband restored it himself in '98. His partner, Mila, leaned down to inspect the faded oriental rug near the front window. "This whole place has soul. It's not just some flip. It feels loved." I smiled at that. There was no truer word for it. This home had held my best and worst moments, first birthdays and final breaths, laughter echoing off walls now heavy with silence. As we walked through the house, I guided them room by room. But it didn't feel like a real estate transaction. It felt like storytelling. The hallway bathroom still had the height marks where Kyle grew from toddler to teenage giant. The kitchen held the tiny scorch mark where I once forgot cornbread in the oven on Thanksgiving. Even the creaky third step on the staircase had its charm. I never fixed it. You need one thing in a house that complains when you sneak around. We stepped out onto the back deck. The breeze nipped our skin, but Mila stood still, eyes closed. "You can hear the trees here," she said. "That's why we never trimmed them too much. My husband used to say the maples deserve to speak." We stood together in the soft rustling, and for once, I wasn't guarding myself. I wasn't apologizing for the age of the house, or the smell of lemon polish, or the wallpaper Jenna always called geriatric. I was letting go with grace. "We're not in a rush to move in," Nate said as we stepped back inside. "And I noticed there's a finished unit out back. It's separate enough, has its own entrance. If you ever want to stay close, just until you figure out what's next, the offer's open." It hit me how rare that was. To be offered space with no strings, no entitlement, no manipulation masquerading as love. But I shook my head gently. That chapter's closed. It's time I wrote a new one. Just then, the front door opened hard, nearly slamming into the coat rack. Jenna. She stopped short when she saw the couple. Her hair was windswept, cheeks flushed, and her eyes darted to me, then to them. "What is this?" she asked, voice already sharp, already climbing. The couple looked at each other, unsure. "We're the buyers," Nate said carefully. "Elaine's showing us around." Jenna's face paled, then turned deep red. "You're throwing us out during the holidays? Who does that?" I kept my voice calm, measured. "No one's throwing anyone. The house has been sold. You were given 30 days. "You're unhinged," she snapped. "You know that." "You need help." Mila took a step back, clutching her coat tighter. Nate subtly placed a hand on her elbow, guiding her toward the hallway. "I think we should give you all a moment," he said quietly. I nodded. "Thank you. I'll join you in a second." Once they were gone, I looked Jenna square in the eye. This house was never a gift. It was a grace, one you mistook for ownership. She scoffed, pacing in a small, furious circle. "Kyle said you were unstable, but this is next level." I didn't flinch. "I've never been more stable in my life." She stormed off, muttering obscenities under her breath. I let the silence settle again, knowing full well the next few weeks would be a theater of performative chaos from her end. But I had the contract, the closing date, the keys to a future they would never hold again. In the evening, the first time someone forwarded me the video after a long time, I thought it was a mistake. There was Jenna, sitting on a milk crate outside what looked like a hotel, tears smeared across her cheeks, and a red scarf looped around her neck like she was in a Christmas tragedy. Her voice trembled as she faced the camera. "My mother-in-law kicked us out with no warning," she sniffled. "During the holidays. I mean, what kind of person does that to family?" The video ended with her pulling her son, my grandson, into the frame, holding him tight and whispering, "We're doing our best, baby." The views exploded overnight. 500,000, then 1,000,000. I watched it twice, stone-faced. The soft piano music in the background, the exaggerated lighting, the strategic mention of my supposed mental decline. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was spinning it like I was some cruel old woman with no heart and too much time on her hands. There were hashtags, boomer eviction, holiday homeless, even one that said number grandma gate. Then the comments started rolling in. Some were sympathetic to her, but others started asking questions. Wait, wasn't she living in her mother-in-law's house rent-free? Didn't the mom own the home outright? Why is there no mention of the actual property sale? Anyone got the other side of the story? I hadn't planned on saying anything. Silence was my power, always had been. But then my phone rang one night while I was folding laundry, and the name on the screen made me pause. Sophie, my granddaughter from Kyle's older half-sister. She lived 3 states away and rarely called. "Hi, Grandma," she said hesitantly. "I saw Jenna's video. I don't know what to believe. Can you tell me what really happened?" I sat down on the edge of my bed, cotton towel still warm in my lap. So I told her, not in anger, not to defend myself, just the truth. "I gave them my home for years," I said. "I paid the bills. I bought groceries. And when I said no, she told me I should have died instead of her mother." There was a silence on the other end, and then Sophie said something that lit a fire I didn't realize still burned in me. "You should say that publicly. People need to hear from you, not just her story." So I did. Carol helped me set up a quiet little space in her sunroom, a vase of winter flowers, a cup of tea beside me. The camera was still, no filters, no music, just me in a cable-knit sweater with a voice steady as a courtroom gavel. I explained the timeline. I spoke about the deed, the betrayal, the eviction, the lies. And then, I showed the documents, copies of the sale, notarized affidavits, even Kyle's text from months back asking me to sign over the title for tax reasons. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and it worked. By the next day, Jenna's comment section had turned. Fast. "Girl, you left out a lot. Her receipts hit harder than you're crying. Wait, she gave you 30 days and you made it sound like she tossed you into the snow? You weaponized your kid. That's low." Even people who'd once supported her started deleting their comments. Carol brought over cookies that night, giggling like a teenager. "You broke the internet, Elaine." I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. I had always been the quiet one, the background support. But now I realized silence wasn't always noble. Sometimes it was just letting liars speak louder. I was sipping tea when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But then I picked up. "Hi, this is Rachel Delaney from the Courier-Journal. We're working on a story about elder rights and property disputes. I saw your video. Would you be open to a feature interview?" The journalist met me at a local cafe, sunlight spilling across our table like it was blessing the moment. She came alone, just a legal pad, a small mic, and a calm smile. "I watched both videos," she said. "Yours didn't go viral, but it made people think. That's harder." I nodded, cradling my coffee with both hands. "I don't want to be a spectacle. I just want to be heard, without shouting." We spoke for over an hour. I told her everything, from the moment Jenna moved in with her mother's grief still fresh and sour, to the night she told me I should have died instead. Rachel asked sharp questions, but with gentleness, like she was drawing a line in chalk, not carving a wound open. Then she said, "Do you mind if I look into the financial side? You mentioned some strange mail before. If anything's illegal, we'll need proof." I didn't flinch. "Go ahead. I kept it all." And I had. Every misaddressed envelope, every urgent notice I was told to ignore, every stack of unopened junk mail that Kyle used to toss before I could see it. I handed her the stack in a manila folder labeled "Kyle plus Jenna, suspicious." I hadn't meant it as a joke, but it felt like one now. Rachel left with a thank you and a promise to dig deep. I didn't expect much. 3 days later, she called me, voice sharp with urgency. "You were right," she said. "They took out multiple payday loans, at least 4 different companies. But here's the kicker. They used your address and Kyle signed 2 of them with your name." My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected criminal activity. Manipulation? Yes. But this? This is mail fraud and identity misuse. We've run it by our legal team. We're including it in the article. But I thought you should know before it hits print. I sat in silence for a moment, then said what I hadn't dared believe I'd feel. I want to press charges. Rachel paused. You sure? I've spent years being unsure. I'm done with that now. The article dropped 2 days later under the headline, Boomer Betrayal, A Mother's Quiet Fight Against Financial Abuse. It wasn't flashy, no pop culture tie-ins, no sobbing confessionals, but it was thorough and devastating. They included side-by-side documents, my clean credit score, the forged loan applications, the video Jenna posted, and a notarized letter from me explaining my decision to sell. The public flipped again. Commenters called for accountability. One wrote, "This is elder abuse with an Instagram filter." Another said, "She raised him better than this." And he unlearned every bit of it. Meanwhile, the sale of the house finalized. I signed the last document at the real estate office, watching as the deed transferred in silence. The young tech couple had wired full payment, clean, quick, and done. Carol took me out for pie after, said it was a freedom slice. I barely tasted the cinnamon or butter, but the texture felt real, solid, like the start of something new. That evening, as I packed the last few things from the linen closet, a knock came at the door. I opened it and found a man in a USPS vest holding a plain envelope. "Are you Jenna Martin?" he asked. I shook my head. "Number, but I know where she is." He handed it over. Court summons, certified. And there it was, her name in bold, the seal stamped over the flap. Mail fraud, identity theft, unauthorized loan acquisition, the works. I didn't feel angry. I felt clean. I never thought I'd see my son sitting across from me in a courtroom, flanked by a woman who once called me Mom, like it meant something. But there we were. The courtroom smelled like paper and tension. The air was dry, recycled, and just cold enough to keep everyone slightly uncomfortable. Jenna wore a soft pink cardigan, probably to look innocent. Kyle couldn't even meet my eyes. The bailiff called the case, and it began. They claimed elder abuse. Jenna's voice shook, but her words didn't. "She's unstable. We were trying to help her, and she turned on us." Kyle, finally looking up, added, "She's confused. She started making erratic financial decisions, and kicking us out was retaliation. We were protecting her estate." Protecting it? They were draining it. My attorney, Michelle Chang, stood slowly and walked toward the judge's bench. Her heels echoed like a ticking clock, measured, deliberate, final. "No witnesses for the plaintiffs?" she asked. "Just statements?" The judge raised a brow. "Correct." Michelle nodded, then clicked a remote. A screen lit up. First, the notarized will, updated after I found Kyle at my safe. Second, screenshots of Jenna's messages calling me a memory loss grenade waiting to explode. Third, the TikTok post and the follow-up comments where Jenna mocked my mobility scooter as a prop for sympathy. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Michelle continued, calm as ever. "Your Honor, what they're calling erratic decisions are called boundaries. What they call mental decline is called financial independence. What they claim is abuse is actually accountability." Kyle began to shift in his seat. Jenna folded her arms and hissed something under her breath. Michelle didn't flinch. "Lastly," she said, sliding a USB into the port, "security camera footage from inside the home, footage my client had installed legally after noticing suspicious activity." The video played. Kyle opening the safe with a duplicate key, Jenna whispering, "We'll find it eventually," as she rifled through my bedroom drawer. Silence. Even the court reporter paused, eyes wide. The judge leaned forward, lips pursed. "Do either of you deny this is you in the footage?" Jenna tried. "It's context matters." "No," the judge cut in. "It doesn't. Not here." I watched the judge's eyes settle on mine, softening a little. Mrs. Linton, is there anything else you wish to say? I stood. My legs felt strong, not heavy like they had when I'd first heard those awful words in my kitchen weeks ago. I gave them my home, I said, voice steady. I paid for groceries. I babysat during postpartum. I ignored insults, disrespects, and boundary crossings. But I didn't give them my life to carve up. The judge nodded slowly. Case dismissed. This was never elder abuse. It was elder exploitation. I strongly recommend both parties seek psychological counseling. And if I may say so, Ms. Linton, you've handled this with grace I rarely see. I didn't smile. I just turned, gathered my things, and walked past them. Past Jenna's tears that came too late. Past Kyle's silence that always came too soon. Out the double doors, into the brisk air that smelled like a clean break. Michelle walked beside me. That went about as well as it could have, she said. I nodded. No apologies, but I didn't come for those. She smiled. That's strength, Elaine. Before I even got to the car, my phone buzzed. Realtor. The check cleared. You're officially out. I stared at the screen. Officially out. Of the house. Of their orbit. Of the trap I'd mistaken for family. For the first time in decades, my home didn't echo with resentment. No slammed doors, no judgmental sighs behind hallway corners, just the steady hum of seagulls, wind chimes, and the shuffle of my slippers against hardwood that still smelled faintly of new varnish. I'd traded square footage for solitude, and I never felt richer. The condo sat tucked on the third floor of a weathered complex near Lake Erie. The balcony was small, but it caught the morning sun just right. I kept a tin watering can by the sliding door and a pair of begonias that bloomed in coral bursts. Carol said they reminded her of lipstick from the 70s. I spent my mornings volunteering at the community garden just 2 blocks away. The dirt under my nails felt like purpose. By afternoon, I was usually seated in the library corner of the senior center, helping others sort through insurance forms or write letters they couldn't bring themselves to speak out loud. Pain was universal. So was survival. Carol came by most Fridays, always with too many cookies and not enough napkins. One evening, she walked in with a tiny foil-wrapped cupcake and a single candle jammed into the frosting. No more house, no more moochers. That's worth toasting, she said. We clinked our tea mugs together like champagne glasses. Later that night, I sat at my desk, a modest little nook in the corner of the living room. A leather-bound journal lay open. The heading read, Chapter 1, The Difference Between Generosity and Sacrifice. I'd always hated how stories made older women one-dimensional, either helpless or bitter. I wanted to tell the truth, about boundaries, about how we give and give until someone teaches us to take it back, about how betrayal from your own blood doesn't bleed less, it just cuts deeper. I wrote until my hand cramped. Just after midnight, I closed the journal and leaned back. Through the open window, I could hear the low rumble of a car engine. At first, I thought it was a neighbor. Then it didn't move. A soft knock rattled the door. I froze. My fingers hovered over the lamp switch. Instinct told me not to answer. But something else, something defiant, urged me to look. I drew the curtain back just enough to peek. Kyle. His hair was messier than I remembered, like it hadn't been washed in a while. He stood with both hands in the pockets of a jacket too thin for the evening chill. No Jenna. No fake cheer. Just him. I opened the door, but only the chain length. I need to talk, he said. His voice cracked like it hadn't been used honestly in a while. I studied his eyes. There was desperation there, but I couldn't tell yet if it was regret or just the fear of losing what he thought he could still control. I'm not here to fight, he added quickly. Please, just 10 minutes. I've said everything I needed to say, I replied. I haven't, he whispered, and I lost everything. A pause. He stood there like a boy who had finally lost his last excuse. I opened the door, not wide, just enough to let him see I wasn't afraid of him, but not foolish enough to invite him in. Kyle looked gaunt. Dark circles clung to his eyes, and his coat was buttoned wrong, like he'd rushed to look put together, and still couldn't manage it. Can I sit? He asked. No, I said flatly. The hallway light buzzed above us, casting a pale hum over the silence. He looked down at his shoes, scuffed and damp. "I'm not here to fight," he said. I don't know where else to go." I leaned my shoulder against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I'd spent years preparing meals, folding his laundry, babysitting his children while he and Jenna reconnected. And in return, I was called dead weight. "Jenna's gone," he said quietly. "Took what was left in our joint account. Blamed everything on me. Guess I deserved that." I didn't respond. I wasn't going to bail him out with words. He glanced up. "You think I'm lying. I think you're still talking like someone who's waiting to be rescued." The words hit him like a slow slap, dull, delayed, but stinging all the same. "I've lost everything," he said. "The house, the money, my job. I just needed someone to talk to." "You mean someone to fix it?" His jaw clenched. "Why are you being like this? I'm your son." I let the silence hold, let it weigh him down. "You sat there," I finally said, "in my house, while your wife screamed I should have died instead of her mother, and you said nothing." He winced. "I didn't mean for any of this, but you let it happen." I stepped out just enough for my voice to drop lower, calmer. "Gratitude was your rent, Kyle. You defaulted." His lips parted, then closed again. No words came. Maybe for the first time he realized there wasn't an apology deep enough to undo it. "I didn't come for money," he said, softer now. I wanted to understand why you did it, why you sold the house." I tilted my head. "Because it was mine to sell. Because living in it started to feel like slow death. And because you never earned the roof you thought you were owed." He swallowed hard, tears welling. But I didn't move. I didn't offer him the softness he thought still existed between us. "There's no deed left to sign," I said. "No will. No trust. No shared lock or name on a mailbox. You're not my dependent, Kyle. You're just a man who burned his bridge and thinks smoke is still a signal fire." The silence between us stretched like a rope. Then he took a step back, blinking fast, lips trembling. "I guess I deserve that," he muttered. I didn't nod. I didn't soften. I simply closed the door without another word. Inside, I walked straight to my desk. A thick manila envelope waited, sealed, addressed, and stamped. Inside it were the original blueprints to the house. My husband and I had kept them all these years, tucked away like some kind of sentimental anchor, but they weren't sentimental anymore. They were a burden passed too far. I scrawled a short note. "You deserve to know the history you weren't part of. Build something better, or don't. Grandma." Then I dropped the envelope into the outgoing mail tray and turned off the porch light. I used to think legacy meant passing down china sets and photo albums. I used to think it meant making sure your son had security, that your family name meant something on paper. Not anymore. Now, legacy feels like choosing peace over obligation. The morning light filtered through my condo's sheer curtains, painting golden stripes across the hardwood. I poured a mug of coffee, strong and black, and sat down at the kitchen table with the documents spread before me, my will, my trust, and the letterhead of a firm I'd come to trust more than my own blood. The lawyer's voice still echoed in my head from our last meeting. "You don't owe anyone your estate just because they share your DNA." So I changed it. All of it. I scratched out Kyle and Jenna's names with a firm stroke, and in their place I added two that meant more. My granddaughter, Lily, my daughter's child, and the Willow Path Women's Shelter. They had never asked me for a thing, never guilted me with bloodlines or birthdays. Lily sent handwritten cards just to say hello. And the women at Willow Path? Survivors. Just like me. As I signed the final page, my hand trembled, but not from fear. It was the feeling of a chain falling off. Carol stopped by that afternoon with her arms full of grocery bags and a celebratory bottle of white wine. "You look light," she said, placing the bottle on the counter. "Like you shed skin." "I shed dead weight," I replied, half laughing. She raised her eyebrows, noticing the packet of documents beside my coffee mug. Is that it? The official rewrite? I nodded. Kyle and Jenna are out. Lily gets the remainder, and the shelter gets a quarterly gift and my car. I even set up a scholarship. A scholarship? She asked, intrigued. For aging caregivers, I said, and my voice caught a little. Women who give everything, and then get told they're too much or not enough when they need something back. Carol smiled so warmly I thought she might cry. Now that's a legacy. We toasted with water instead of wine. I'd had enough dizzy days, emotional and otherwise. Later, while organizing my desk, I tucked the updated will into a fireproof lockbox and slipped a flash drive beside it. Digital copies, backups, passwords, everything in place. I no longer feared what would happen when I was gone. I feared what would have happened if I hadn't done this. I even wrote Lily a letter to accompany it one day. I didn't tell her about the fights or the insults, just the love, the pride, the warning not to confuse inheritance with entitlement. Night fell soft and slow, the way it only does in spring. I pulled on a cardigan and stepped onto the small patio where Carol had planted pansies for me last week. The breeze was cool but forgiving, and I sat in the woven chair with my knitting and an old jazz record whispering through the screen door. I didn't hear the delivery van pull up, just the soft thud of a package on my front doormat. I frowned. I hadn't ordered anything. Inside, I peeled the brown paper away. No return address, just a box, worn at the edges but carefully taped shut. When I opened it, my breath left me. Nestled inside was my late husband's watch, not just any watch, the silver one with the leather band he wore every day for 30 years. I'd searched for it after his death, thinking maybe he'd left it somewhere for me. But it had vanished. Now here it was, polished, preserved, and engraved. I turned it over, reading the small, careful etching on the back. To E. You always knew when time was up. M. There was no card, no explanation, just that. And suddenly, the air around me felt charged, like the wind carried something more than just weather. The tide was low that morning, whispering against the shore like it didn't want to wake anyone. I sat on the weathered bench facing the lake, my journal on my lap, the spine cracked open to a blank page. I could smell the brine in the air, clean, slightly metallic. The sun hadn't fully risen, just a soft gold halo brushing the tops of the water. I exhaled slowly, the way my therapist once told me to, like I was releasing weight from my bones. This was the place I came to most mornings now. Quiet, no echoes of slamming doors or voices thrown like knives, just gulls in the distance and the rhythmic hush of water greeting sand. My life had shrunk in size, fewer people, fewer expectations, but somehow it felt fuller than it had in decades. I uncapped my pen and turned to the letter I'd been drafting for weeks. One final message, not to Kyle, not to Jenna, not even to Lily. This one was for me. Dear Elaine, you survived. That's the first thing I need you to remember. The words flowed slowly, then all at once. Paragraphs filled with truths I never gave myself space to say out loud, how it felt to be overlooked in my own kitchen, the sting of betrayal when silence spoke louder than insults, the moment I chose not revenge, but return, stained fingers and laughter that had once echoed through that house like music. Now, the only names in my legal life were the ones who'd shown up with kindness, not demands. I didn't check Jenna's TikTok anymore, didn't stalk Kyle's sporadic Facebook posts, always cloaked in victimhood. I had no interest in how their version of the story was being told, because this life, these choices, were mine, and no one could rewrite them. As I sat back down at the kitchen table, I noticed Lily's card from last week still pinned on my fridge, a simple watercolor drawing of daisies and the words, "You taught me to grow what loves you back." She was right. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the blinds and carrying with it a faint scent of the lake. I left the door open, welcoming the air inside like an old friend. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine, and stood in the middle of my living room. No noise, no accusations, no shifting around someone else's anger, and I thought, not for the first time, I did it. I really did it. I didn't burn the bridge, I sold it, brick by brick, paperwork by paperwork, signature by signature.